Good evening. Thank you all for coming to the Collegian Journalism Conference. My name is Molly Vogel. I'm a member of the class of 2000. I was an English major. I was a Collegian opinion columnist, which did not hurt my future journalism career. And then I now have the pleasure of working at Kenyon, including as the advisor for paper. So we're thrilled you could be with us tonight. It's also my pleasure to introduce Matt Winkler of the class of 1977, one of our more illustrious former Collegian editors-in-chief. No offense to the others in this room, there are many, which is great. He was a history major who went on to co-found Bloomberg News and served as his first editor-in-chief. He's an emeritus member of the Kenyon Board, as well as the Kenyon Review Board, and is a visiting professor at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, teaching a course based on his book, The Bloomberg Slave. I'd like to welcome Matt up to begin our evening.
Thank you, Molly. It's an honor to be back here, and you can't possibly know why it's an honor to me to be back. Among us are several people who go back decades of opinions. And one of the people who you could say was my inspiration in journalism goes back very far in this period, and that would be Fred Puder. And when I got to Ting, and by the way, of course, after then, where Holly? There she is. Fred Kluge's better half. Okay, Ham is also a great journalist. We had something in common. It's called the Wall Street Journal. But lots of other things as well. Knight Badgett Fellow, she is, and there was affiliated with Mint Badgett of Columbia. But I want to say some things about why this event tonight is so important, because I really want you to know my career in journalism got its greatest inspiration from Fred, who edited the Collegian. And when I saw the Collegian back when I arrived in 1973, it was the most literary. It had no grammatical errors, no copy mistakes. It was impeccably edited. And one of its great achievements was it didn't just cover Kenyon. The Collegian actually covered the world. And you might think that's presumptuous of you to say that. But in fact, when Fred was editor, there was, in fact, a story about, and it's been written about more recently, when Bob Dylan came to Kenyon, and one of the Collegian reporters spent the weekend with Bob Dylan. Fred edited that series, and the reporter for the Collegian, he did so well that he quit the Collegian, he quit Kenyon, he went on to Time magazine, he became a screenwriter for Martin Scorsese, and anyway, you get the picture. So obviously the Collegian has in it so many things in its history that make tonight especially special. And that's enough from me. I just got the book. It's time for everyone to enjoy our distinguished parents. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to be here. I'm Durkee of Tube. I'm one of the Collegian editor-in-chief. I am a peer and artist and media teacher. I've been being an agent basically since I got it, Menon. I started out as a staff writer. Then I moved to opinion. Then I moved to arts. Dabbled a little in social media. So this paper is very near and dear to my heart. And it is our absolute pleasure tonight to be faced with McCabe in your RV pick. Along with our executive director, Micah Ehrenstein, we are going to be taking turns moderating this very distinguished panel tonight. And we also want to be sure that we have time for questions in the end. So start thinking about questions that we like to ask. Andre?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sasha Prandola. I am a senior here at Kenyon, majoring in art history as a minor in classics and contemporary law and deciding. Like Darcy, I also have the privilege of serving as an editor-in-chief of Volume 1, Kitty 3 of the Parisian. And the Collegian is absolutely my baby, but I'm also very lucky to be involved on championing at the Senior Admissions Fellow, Competition Coordinator for the Baltic Dance Club, and working on honored t-shirts related to the recreation of the Rourk district. So safe to say the Collegian is my favorite. Don't tell admission, though. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our panel. Erin Mershon is the Deputy Media Editor for the New York Times. She previously worked at Stat, where she delivered a string of agenda-setting and award-winning coverage from her perch as Washington Bureau and Associate Managing Editor. One investigation she helped oversee last year on the danger of AI use in medicine was named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. She was a political scientist. AJ Rourk was the recipient of the first class of the New York Times College Scholarship. AJ was able to attend Kenyon and intern at Times during summers and academic weeks. After graduating, he joined from New York Times as a news assistant and later moved as a manager. Seeking a new challenge, he transitioned to The New Yorker, where he currently serves as Director of Operation.
Beth Bennett is the Associate Dean and Professor of Journalism at Medill at Northwestern. She's an award-winning producer and reporter with more than 15 years' experience in broadcast television news and debate. Her experience spans many areas of the news, including on-air programs, video distribution, and broadcasting. Since leaving the broadcast industry, she has worked in short films and real production, independent Boston and Frank. She in the art district. Emma Specter is the culture writer at Vogue. She covered film, TV, books, politics, news, and almost anything kid. She has previously worked at Collage and LAS and has freelanced her outlets including A Hairpin, Bon Appetit, Them, The Hollywood Reporter, and more. The first book, More Thieves, on Through That, Binging, Longing, and the Lust for a Mouse, is now out in CopperCon. She lives in Los Angeles, and she was a UD. Last but certainly not least, David McCabe is a New York Times reporter. He covers the complex legal and policy issues created by the digital harmony informer. He writes about attempts by American regulators for bringing in power of prominent technology companies. In recent years, he's covered the federal investigations into whether Google, Apple, Meta, and Amazon built anti-trust. Some of his reporting also focuses on debates over how to regulate speech on it to report his valley. He was a political class. And now I'd like to welcome Executive Director Erin Mershon to talk on me.
All right, thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Dorothy, and thank you all for coming. My name is Mike Ehrenstein. I'm the Collegian's Executive Director. I'm a senior international studies and Arabic major. But you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from our wonderful panelists. So we're going to get it started right away, starting with you, Erin. Tell us about how you would describe your position for someone who doesn't know much about journalism. How did you end up where you are now?
Yes, well, sorry, I'm fighting a bit of a head cold, but first let me say thank you to you, Mike, to the conference, to other students, and to Molly for organizing this and for bringing us all here today. So as Sasha and Dorothy said, I am the Deputy Media Editor for the New York Times, which means that I run a team of reporters who cover the media industry. That's everything from sort of traditional newspapers, radio, television, Hollywood, and on down to social media. So it's a pretty broad remit, and I help assign them stories, edit their coverage, look at sort of how to make things sharper, how to make things clearer, and ultimately edit the words that go out into New York Times every day.
What about you, AJ?
So I'm AJ Rourk, class of 03, and I am the Director of Operations for New Yorker. So I guess sometimes when I'm describing my job to folks, sometimes I compare it to that of a mechanic, where I am sort of having a look under the hood and making sure that things are running smoothly. And where it's not, I make some repairs and some adjustments. So two big parts of my job, my biggest responsibilities are contributor safety and overseeing the hiring process. So with contributor safety, if we're assigning a story that may seem dangerous, we need to make sure that they filled out the proper deployment forms that has all their like personal information and emergency contacts and so forth. And that we have them on their appropriate insurance. And if they need it, we provide them with like security gear, with your vest, helmet, goggles, what have you. In terms of the hiring process, when I was promoted into my role that I'm in right now, the New Yorker happened to be growing quite a bit. And many of the managers did not know, who to go to for what or how long a certain process should take. And so I was tasked with creating some order. And so I took some time and I created like a hiring workflow, which is my baby. I tweak it all the time. But it's literally it's a dive for the hiring manager from the moment that they need to open up the job requisition all the way until they hire their candidate. And how did I get here? That's a long story. I think most of that was already covered in my bio. So maybe unless you want me to
Cede your time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell it again. So my kind of my career, I feel like it kind of like took off a little bit before I got to Kenyon, where I won the New York Times college scholarship. And while I was studying here, I was able to intern at the Times, done summer breaks and academic breaks and so forth. And many of those times I got to work in the HR department, which was lovely. And I'll tell you that those are the people that you want to be friendly with. You want them to know who you are, because when you graduate and you're looking for a job, they could very well be the person that helps you. And so anyway, so I graduated from Kenyon with a degree in Spanish. And I did have a couple jobs in Columbus, Ohio in the medical field. And sure, I was using my Spanish degree and that was great. But it just wasn't my passion. And I, to be honest, if I'm really being honest, I felt like it was just like a job just to, pay the bills. And so I decided, I need to get back to the Times. And so at the time I rang up an old friend. I said, this is what I'm thinking. And they had me come up to New York. I got hired as a news assistant and I held that job for about 6 or 7 years. And I got to work in almost like so many different departments in a newsroom, which is great for me because I got to learn really how the New York Times is put together and how it operates. And then I was hired into management, and I also got to work at a bunch of different desks, which was also great. Many of the desks that I'd already previously worked for. But the last job that I had at the Times was at the international desk, where I was running or managing 30 bureaus all over the world. And that was a very, 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 very big job that kept me up very late and challenged me a lot. And I love that because, we got to challenge ourselves or whatever. When I was looking for my next challenge, that's what took me to the New Yorker. And when I first got hired, I was working in the business office, helping them track our writer fulfillment that are, the writers that are on contract. And then I got promoted to where we're in right now.
Thank you so much, AJ. So for any students that haven't interned at the New York Times yet, you're already behind. But Beth, what about you?
Thank you. Well, hello, and thank you so much to the Collegian staff for organizing this. I want to quickly thank my parents for coming in and being here tonight. My mom and dad, Susan and Bill Bennett. My dad is a 1968 Kenyon grad. And then also a quick shout out to my uncle, Bill Yost, who is also a 1968 grad. He couldn't make it tonight. And if anyone wants to know how my dad and my uncle both graduated in 1968 and we're not blood relatives, I will tell you that story later, but it's about the magic of Kenyon College and the relationships that you form here. So anyway, I was a working journalist for about 10 years. I have to point out Ted Mason, also my advisor here tonight. So Ted was my advisor, and yeah, probably one of the two people at Kenyon, Ted and Cy Wainscott, who helped steer me into journalism. So thank you, Dorat. I was a working journalist for about 10 years. I got my master's degree at Medill. Right after I graduated from Kenyon, I graduated in May and started at Medill in June. I didn't know anything really. I had worked on the Collegian, which was an amazing experience, but I needed that year to really kind of develop and learn. I loved being a journalist, but I started teaching journalism in 2003. And sometimes I'm a little bit like, do we need the graduation year on all this? Like, um, so, and I found that I really loved teaching and also being in a university environment. And so since then, I have been teaching. I became a professor at Medill, and then I moved into academic administration about 12 years ago. And so my job as an academic administrator doesn't have a lot to do with journalism, but it drives on my journalism skills all the time. It really is about leading and management. So I oversee kind of all the academic pieces of our journalism programs, undergrad and grad. I look at enrollment all the time. I'm always working on enrollment, recruiting strategy. It's kind of an ongoing sort of pursuit. And then I love working with our students and seeing, how they develop and grow. We have a lot of amazing alums who come through our program. And I always joke that I can't walk through O'Hare Airport without seeing up on the monitors. I'll be like, Medill, 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 because so many of our alums are now out there working, and it's really gratifying to me to see that. So that's sort of my job. And the journalism that I learned here, I certainly carry through to the end in the academic administration piece. Hi, I'm Emma Specter, class of 2015, and it feels like such a cliche to say there's no typical day at Vogue, but to give you, I decided maybe it's best to just give you a random day from last week in which my stories that I covered in my beat as culture writer for the website included pop culture Halloween costumes. That was what I would refer to as the SEO piece of my job that keeps the lights on and can also be really fun. And part of the exciting challenge of my job is trying to do it in a way that feels mildly exciting and not like slop. Sometimes it's slop. It happens. And then the same day I was also working on a feature that went up, I think this week, about the Kathy comics, which, God, some of you are probably way too young to have any clue what that is, but these iconic comics by this illustrator Kathy Geisweit, that feature was published this week under the title "I'm Not a Carrie, I'm a Kathy." And when I go back to LA, where I'm based, at the end of the week, I'll be running around once again trying to concoct that mix of slop and creative content that, in this case, will be for Vogue's annual Vogue World event, which is held in LA this year. So yeah, I would say every day is a mix of interests that I feel shockingly lucky to get to be involved with in a way. And in terms of sort of how I got into this job, I think writing was always on the table and modeled for me as a possibility. My parents are both journalists. We can totally have the Nepo baby discussion if we want. But I didn't really feel like it was a path for me, or I didn't feel like I had carved out the confidence to write with authority about the environment that I was in until I got to Kenyon, and because into my list, David McCabe hired me to work on The Brill, which was the first time that I felt like being a quiet weirdo in high school didn't have to necessarily bar me from making observations about the place where I landed that turned out to be the best place for me, Kenyon College. And I still use the skills that I developed at the Frill every day. I used them prior to Vogue at Vice. Prior to Vice, I used them at LAist, which thank God exists again, but is a publication that shuttered while I was there for like 5 years of my writing life. The minute I got an assignment from a place, it would immediately shutter. And I started to wonder if I was the problem. But it's okay. I have a job now. And yeah, I'm just constantly thrilled and confused that I get to do this for a living.
I'm always very obvious and easy tire. So my name is David McCabe. I'm a beat reporter at the New York Times, and I cover tech policy. And a beat, for those of you who might not know, is sort of journalism jargon or the topic you cover and focus on. And what that means is while some reporters may spend all of their time on an investigation or a feature, my job involves sort of all of the above. So first and foremost, the stories in tech policy that we care about, I'm responsible for making sure we're on top of the news, hopefully that we are breaking the news. You're also thinking about how can I write what we call enterprise, which are sort of deeper stories and longer-term stories about the people and the personalities and the ideas that are animating the debate that I cover. And then you're thinking about even further out. Are there ways that you really get ahead and dig into a story that will be very meaningful to our audience and important? And the hope is that it all coheres into a distinctive and leading and independent news report on the topic that I cover. And I do so in collaboration with a huge number of colleagues at the librarian, from our editors to our many reporters. So, for example, I spent a lot of time covering Google and its legal troubles. We have a reporter who is full-time dedicated to covering beepers or box sectors all the time, and it allows us to look really to this spurs a little data.
Thank you. And so, David, sticking with you, and then we're going to go right back down the line. Tell us about a project or a story that you've been working on recently that you're really passionate about, and one of your favorites that you've been working. And time frame, recent is open to your interpretation.
Sure. So there are a lot of individual stories that I'm proud of, but one interesting part of my job has been sort of outside of the daily writing, which is, so as I mentioned, we've been covering what are two major landmark federal trials against Google. You don't need to know that much. We know that the government called Google a monopoly, and then they took them to court. And in one of these cases over Google's search engine, the product that you probably know Google for, we found that as this case went to trial at great taxpayer expense, and with huge stakes for people who use Google, which is pretty much everybody, that the judge was sealing the courtroom, and that the two sides were being selective and slow about how they shared the evidence being displayed in court. And this is a real problem because people don't wait 2-3 days, right, to read about what happened in the courtroom. And we don't wait 2 or 3 days to report it. So we needed access to this information. And I was able to work with our lawyers at the Times and in partnership with a number of news organizations, but most importantly, Bloomberg News, to go into court. And our lawyers appeared before the judge and said, this is unacceptable. This is violating the public's right to access this proceeding that, again, is being held in their name and at taxpayer expense. And we were able to win really meaningful concessions from the judge, including the release of documents that he might not have seen otherwise. And so that is a really meaningful part of my job, both because the Times has an excellent legal department and they're amazing to work with. And it also allows us to stand up for the right of the whole press and really work together as a reporting corps to support, again, this daily reporting ability.
Well, thank you, David, and a special shout out to all 3 Bing users in the room. We'll keep going right down the line.
Now it's more about ChatGPT, but yeah.
I actually temped at Google for 2 months, little known Emma lore. So hearing that David is on the case, I mean, I stole a lot of pens, so I got a lot out of that, but keep buying them. Yeah. I think that's a story that I was particularly excited to work on, let's just say in the last year, was a profile told kind of through the lens of a fundraiser for near feral hopefuls around Mamdani. I live in LA, so I kind of sold my move to LA to my editors. I was like, my mom lives in New York. I can be back all the time. And it sometimes is a challenge to sort of to be in LA, keep a foot in New York, make sure that our political coverage on Vogue's site is feeling not too local while still highlighting important local issues where and when we can. But I have felt there have been a lot of times prior to coming to Vogue and prior to entering journalism where I wondered if having strong political beliefs would in any way bar me from doing political journalism or doing any kind of journalism, honestly. And I feel like writing this profile of Zoran's fundraiser was a really exciting opportunity to get to use a lot of the contacts that I've made from doing organizing in New York and LA and across the country, and to kind of tell a story. I think the concern in balancing this profile was how do we write about a sort of fancy fundraiser at, a rich New York person's home for a candidate who is claiming to kind of give voice to the downtrodden and represent a way forward for average New Yorkers. And I really didn't want the piece to feel like, oh, all the fancy ladies and, what came out for Zoran. I didn't want it to go biased in that direction. I also didn't want it to feel overly harsh on what I think are some really admirable goals of his campaign. And ultimately, I think working with my editors, I have really great editors, and I work with an amazing photographer named Dean Majid, who is an incredibly talented artist and took some beautiful portraits. That's something I really didn't understand before I came to such a visual forward publication, how much visuals, which I wouldn't call my gift, help you tell the story. But I think using those photos in concert with talking to a pretty, especially for a New York brownstone party, pretty wide swath of New Yorkers who came together to try to create an event that reflected accurately the campaign and where it hopes to go. I felt really happy with the final product, and something I've learned is that you don't necessarily want your sources to always be 100% grilled with your story. It's great when they're not mad at you. I personally love when people aren't mad at me, but it's definitely, a balance to make sure that you're filing something that feels true to the event as you experienced it and not too weighted in any particular direction. In this case, I did happen to really believe in the mission that I was writing about, and I hope that came through, but I also felt like editors were able to help me balance it into something that felt reflective more than part of them. And, use your own familiar. That's all I got. So some of you may be aware that there's a sort of crisis in the state of local news, which is a big concern at Medill. And my colleagues at Medill do a lot of research about local news, what's happened to local news, how can we save local news. And our concern is beyond just local news, but also state news and the coverage of state house, so the state house and state legislatures. And this will come as a big surprise, but when students come to Medill for a master's degree, generally they are not pumped about going to Springfield and covering the state legislature. A lot of our students come to us and they really want to do sports, but they want to do magazine, which is great, very admirable, and we're so excited for them. But it is hard to get students interested in covering the local government, covering state government, especially when you're not from that place. And so I worked with a colleague of mine to raise money for the McCormick Foundation for 3 years of funding to support our students covering the State House in Illinois. And so the way that it works is that we fund them, we pay them a stipend to go cover the State House. And that actually is persuasive. And so we send students downstate. You hired a professor with expertise in state coverage. He works with them and basically runs kind of a mini newsroom. And they turn stories about what's going on downstate and throughout the state. And then they give it to a local wire service and it's distributed throughout the state. So we have 3 years of funding. We worked really hard to put it together. We were worried that students wouldn't be interested in doing it. So we'd raise all this money and then they would want to do it. And it turns out they do. And so now we have an application process because so many students do. So that's something I'm very proud of. And I'm especially proud that we're getting these stories out to the public because these are stories that might not have been covered. And if you know anything about the state of Illinois politics, it really needs some coverage. So I'm very glad that we were there.
So I guess what I would share is that up until this year at the New Yorker, they did not have a TICS page. Like most organizations have them, but for some reason we did not have one until this year. And so leadership came up to me and they said, this is what we want to do. We need you to figure it out and build it. And most of the stuff I knew how to put together, to build certain resources or whatever. But one of the things that I had to use are something about fingerprints and mail envelope. And I was like, I'm not the best with tech. I mean, I could figure things out, but I definitely didn't know what a mail envelope was. And so I remember I did the deepest dive to just try and learn as much as I possibly could. And I worked with our colleagues in the IT department, and we were finally get the page up and running. So that was good. But what I really appreciated was the lesson is that in your career you're going to sometimes be given to projects that you're not going to know all the answers, and so it's in the process of kind of doing that deep dive where you really stretch, as I was saying earlier, and grow and learn or whatever. So that was a project that I year there.
So I think we can publish the Collegian about a tips page longer than the New Yorker. I don't know how that reflects on the New York. All right, what about you, Erin?
So one of the things that I'm really excited about working on the Times, and I've really learned working in such a big newsroom, is that journalism isn't always sort of a story on a page with a headline the way that I think many of us think about it, or even a sort of TV broadcast.
we're sort of experimenting, and I know a lot of newsrooms are doing this sort of other ways of telling the news. And so I was working with one of my brilliant reporters who covers AI, and we were sort of trying to answer this challenge of like really informing people about how good AI have gotten at making images and making video, especially for people who don't play around with ChatGPT, like probably many of you in this room do. Not all our readers do. And so the way that we chose to tell this story was actually through a quiz. So you can Google, like, can you tell what's AI and what's not? And we do have the data on how well people do, and the answer is not very good. But it's a really fun way to look at the challenge of like telling people, okay, these video generators, these image generators are getting a lot better than you might think that they are. And that's still journalism, but it's told with like a very clickable, easy clicks.
All right, thank you, Erin, and thank you, panelists. Believe it or not, that's the end of the introductions segment. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dorothy for our next segment.
Thank you all for getting such wonderful answers. So as an aspiring journalist myself, I want to take my section of the Q&A to ask you guys some questions about your assessment of the state of modern boroughs. So what gives you hope about business of journalism today? But also on the other side of the coin, what fills you with regret? AJ,
I'll take it. Yeah, sure. I feel like right now we are living in a time where I think we're living in a very, I'll just say, a crazy political time. And I think that a lot of people are just trying to make sense of everything. And I think that many of them turn to facts, fact-based reporting. And I feel like that's what makes the work that a lot of everyone sitting up here and some of you in the audience, it matters, right? So that's a good thing. What fills me with dread is the environment in which these journalists have to work. And, when I think about, our president, when he labels them as the enemy, I mean, this is like very, very, very dangerous. And it makes their job difficult. It makes my job even more difficult as I'm trying to keep them safe as they're working out in the field. So this kind of like really dangerous rhetoric is really what ails you with dread.
Thank you. David, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so one thing that gives me some hope is I've seen consumers that they are willing to pay for news and information, and more broadly, like media that they care about. And we see that both at the level of very large companies like the New York Times, which has I think now more than 11 million digital subscribers across the suite of products, from news, but also games and cooking, but at the sports site. But it is not clear that everybody has cracked the news model, the business model code. And to Beth's point, that seems especially true at the local level. And so I think while it is reassuring to see that from, again, a big publication to like the Substack, people recognize that the work is worth paying for and that it one way to signal value. It doesn't mean that the industry's financial precarity has been solved uniform into that is something that they're glad about.
Very comforting to know that my New York Times game subscriptions is making the world a better place. Amo, what are your thoughts?
Well, and I can kind of imperfectly sum up what gives me hope about the journalism industry in one word. And that word is unions. I have been lucky enough to be a union steward at Vogue and part of the organizing drive for the larger Conde United Union that's been public for a few years now. And I'm not here to say that if you just organize your newsroom, everything will be okay and you won't be subject to the ravages of this industry. I'll let other people get more into the ravages. I'm trying to keep it hopeful. But I do strongly feel that coming together with your coworkers to get as much as you can out of your workplace is worth doing. And I also, there's like a quote from Graydon Carter, former editor of Vanity Fair, that I did find really funny, where they asked him if Condé Nast if he was okay with Condé Nast having unions, and he was like, Condé Nast, do they even have phones anymore? They probably should share a pencil. I think they can have a union, which is a lot of people's mentality, and it's funny and it's fair. But I do think that any
organization worth being part of is worth trying to improve. And to me, that means collective organizing and doing your best to create something that the barrier of entry isn't prohibitive for people who, don't come like I do from backgrounds where you're encouraged to go into the arts, go into media, your path is smooth for you. That shouldn't be who you have to be in order to work in this industry. And I really see more doors opening because of the work that my colleagues are doing in the union than I would have thought possible when I started at Vogue. So that's really exciting to me.
Maybe the sports section's getting unionized. It'd be telling it we're not allowed to use the word unfortunate even for full losers again.
We dealt with we dealt with a lot of alliteration. We're
not supposed to read for our own G.
Anyway, sorry for ragging on Tecate. Go Owls. At a time when the First 10th Amendment appears to be under attack, what duty do we have to defend it as journalists, and how can you do so?
I think AJ spoke to this too. That it's a challenge that I think newsrooms across the country are clearly grappling with. It's a really unprecedented time, and I think the best thing that a journalist can do is to really explain what's happening and how it fits into historical context, and to really, it's one thing to write the news and to say what's happening and get it out there. And I think what more and more journalists need to make sure they're doing too is to really put that in context, really say, like, this is what happened today and this is why it matters. I think that's something that we really strive to do in our reporting, is to contextualize it, to make it clear, like, sort of what the gravity of the situation is, what the consequence is. And I think, like, that explanation, that information is really what sort of needs to get out there.
I think sometimes we think a free press is immutable, never-ending, ceaseless thing. And I think it's important that we fight for it, because anytime we hold the powerful people or powerful institutions accountable and they don't like it, they're going to come after us. And that's not a new thing. And I think part of looking at the history of journalism is looking at the history to protect our rights as a big fuss. And I think that's something that I know certainly we remind our students that it's worth fighting for, but it does require a fight sometimes. And that means sometimes standing ground, sometimes retreating and cutting back. But that means not giving up and making sure that we keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Thank you all so much. That's the end of my section. So now I'm thinking the Sasha. Start thinking about your questions so you can mail envelope them to Ajo.
All right. Thank you so much, Dorothy. And thank all of you for such an important and timely discussion. We're very grateful to be able to hear from people who are really on the front lines of this issue. I'm going to pivot a little bit with my section. And I really want to talk about the thing that we all have in common in this room, which of course is Kenyon. So first of all, I want to ask, how did Kenyon get you to where you are? We'll start with Emma and AJ. And I'm wondering, how did Kenyon prepare you to navigate the shifting landscape of journalism? So Emma, why don't we start?
So I know that we're often sort of told to think bigger and widen our scope, and I think there's a lot of wisdom contained in that. But Kenyon, for me, was actually an exercise in shifting scope a little smaller. Famously kind of a small school. I don't know if you guys have heard. But I, as I mentioned earlier, really did not feel a strong sense of confidence in my ability to write incisively, or God forbid, with humor about the environment that I was in before I was hired on the Brill. And I think being at this really small, close-knit school where you could have two totally disparate experiences with going here, but like you're eating at the same dining hall, you're having the same, you might cross paths in the same laundry room or weird party. I went to a lot of weird parties in my time here. I think having that kind of space of like we all are here, even if we're here in very different ways, made me feel like, okay, if I can rise to a place where I'm the co-editor in chief of the school blog, and I'm, observing what makes this place funny and weird and unique and brilliant and an amazing place to be, then it stands to reason that maybe I can have observations about other milieux, never used that word before in my life, that I'm a part of. And I think Kenyon really, keep saying small, which is probably not how Kenyon likes to, tout itself. But truly the friendships that I made here have emboldened me to do everything that I've done in my life. And I was like having a crash out calling one of my friends from Kenyon in the post office last night. So, it never goes away. And I just, for some people, a bigger school or a more urban environment is absolutely the right choice. But I just think being here in rural Ohio with 1,600 other students who get what you're talking about when you say, God, the line in Pierce is really long right now. That specificity really has contributed to who I am as a writer and as a person.
Speaking of the word small, that's what I was going to say, true. I feel like at Kenyon, we all love that we had so many small classes here. And so you really couldn't like disappear into like the background. So you had to have a point of view, you had to defend it, and you had to listen to others. And I feel like that directly correlates to like the newsroom. I'm also grateful to Kenyon for teaching me to, to ask a lot of questions, to be curious. And I feel like, I feel like anyone that I have worked with, they would tell you that I ask a lot of questions, and I do. I really, really do. And I do that because I really want to learn as much as possible so that I am making a very informed decision when I'm creating another workflow or I'm creating another policy or whatever it is. So thank you, Kenyon.
Fantastic. Thank you both. It's so heartening to hear that Kenyon has been such a big part of to make that foundation. So it makes me feel good too as a senior. So another fun fact about this panel is that we have not one or two, but 3 former editors-in-chief of the Collegian with us this evening. So Beth, Erin, and David, you all have held the top job at some point or another. So I am wondering, how did editing the Collegian affect your career path? And Beth, let's start with you.
Well, I think it made me realize I did not know what I was doing. And that prompted me to go figure it out. So we had great advising. When I was a student here, Cy Wainscott was the advisor for our paper. He was absolutely amazing. But, he was a volunteer. And every time I sat down with Cy, I was like, there's so much I don't know. And there's so much in his head. He had been a managing editor at the Cleveland Bee Dealer. There's so much in his head, and he would sit at his kitchen table, and I just wanted to learn it all, and that wasn't part of the so it prompted me to want to learn more. And then when I went to grad school, I realized I still didn't really know what I was doing, and it took a couple years in the business to kind of figure out what I was doing, which I actually think journalism is sort of a little bit like yoga. Like you're always it's like we practice, you're always working at it. But I'm grateful to the Collegian because I think if I had not had those experiences, I probably would not have pursued the career that I pursued. And I'm glad that I had that opportunity at Kenyon and that it was so open that anybody could join the Collegian. It was, everyone was kind of encouraged to be part of it. So I think in that way it served.
Fantastic. Erin, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a bit of my chorus when I was at Kenyon too, but I think everyone should be doing the Collegian all the time. Like there's like there. I don't think there's any better training for journalism than doing journalism. And the Collegian is one of the few things you can do while you're at Kenyon that is extremely, extremely similar to what you will do in the real world. What I did as an editor of the Collegian is not super dissimilar from what I do as an editor at the New York Times. Like, there's very few things that you get to do here, but you can say that that's super similar to what you'll be doing 10 or 15 years down the line. So I would really tell everyone, like, not just do it yourself, but tell your friends to do it. Like, the professionalism and I think the skills you develop in writing, in communicating and working with your peers, in talking to the community, and then to have your work published with your name on it and to know what that feels like. All of that is like exactly what it's like when you're a professional journalist. Just sort of like lower budget. So I think I genuinely would tell you, like, even if you've never done it before, you have a friend who's never done it, and even if writing is not what you want to do, like, do the photos, find a way to do the website, do the design. Like, if you want to go into design the Collegian. Like, it's such a good way to learn how the professional world works in a way that your academic classes, like, which are amazing. And I will say to my professors in the room, like, I loved all of my classes here, but the Collegian is the best. Like, it is. I did choose to go into professional journalism, so it was exactly the training that I wanted and needed. But even if I didn't, I know those are the skills that I would have taken away from Kenyon and to sort of take me into whatever career that I chose.
David, you want to finish this out with this question?
Sure. Well, in a very practical way, and while we're giving credit where it's due, I was edited by Erin Mershon at the Collegian, which was both a very formative experience as a student journalist, and then she was extremely generous, helping me figure out how to move to DC and get a job, and then crash on her couch. And more broadly, you know, I think one theme here is in the size and scale of Kenyon, and what it means practically as a student journalist is that the people recovering, you have to look in the eye, maybe even the morning that your story is published, right? Like, if not in your first class, if not a middle path after your first class, certainly by the time you get to Pierce for lunch, you will see someone that you or the paper has written about, and I think that being editor meant that you were sort of responsible for absorbing all of that feedback, good and bad, and being an ambassador to campus, and just to have that kind of foundational understanding that your work had real stakes because it was about real people, and that you should conduct yourself in a way with integrity and rigor that allows you to, like, look someone in the eye and defend your decision, or you know, hear their feedback with humility, I think was a really important thing. And I think Darren's point would probably be useful in other fields as well, though I can't speak to that on a personal scale.
Can I just add something onto that quickly? This just grew out of a conversation with the Collegian staff, but I also see it in my work. I think being a student journalist is one of the toughest things to do because you live in a really small community with your colleagues. And so when you do a story, if people don't like it, you are with your colleagues in class, you're with them in the dining hall. And so I think if you do this and you love it here, keep going. So
it's certainly a better sales pitch than we could ever send by all stews. So thank you all. For our last question before we move into Q&As in the audience, I'd like to hear from each of you. What is your elevator pitch piece of advice for a Kenyon student who might be interested in emulating your career? David had all the stuff.
Sort of don't, in that, like, the not in that don't go into journalism, but you know, it's just a rapidly changing industry, and it's changing both because of financial pressures on the industry. It's changing because of outside developments, AI, and it's changing because the way people consume information has changed based on the platform where they consume information. And so I don't think, like, the way you got to your dream job 10 years ago is necessarily the same as it would be today. And so I guess my first advice would be, like, be fluid, think about the choices you make, and then just, like, approach the opportunities that do come to you or that you're able to go find with the real sense of what you want and principles. Like, for me, I've always felt if I could just surround myself with the best possible people that are available to me at any given time, that it will make me better at, and I hope that it has. And so that do my best.
I would say this is ripped from the headlines of how I got my job advice. I got up of having a Twitter. Can't really, it's not even called that anymore. Again, I agree with David, can't, say that there's a ton in my specific path that you need to emulate, but I would say have somewhere online or publicly saying that you're doing the kind of writing work you really want to be doing. It doesn't have to come with the fanciest byline. It doesn't have to be the most highest paid opportunity, the concept of a highly paid opportunity in journalism. But have somewhere that you can point to in a pinch and say, this is who I am and this is the kind of work that I want to do. It can be silly, all to the better if it's silly. It doesn't have to necessarily be, newsroom quality stuff, but people want to see who you are on the page, aside from where you've been able to get with it, especially at the beginning of your career. And, it's also, I think that's how you grow and have fun as a writer, and people can see when you're having fun as a writer.
So I don't want to be accused of whistling past the graveyard here, but I think there's a lot of discouragement out there right now for people interested in going into journalism or pursuing journalism. Journalism, if you want to make a lot of money, it may not be for you. Although I know people have made a lot of money in journalism, but if that's your goal, that may be, best served somewhere else. But if it's a calling, it's worth pursuing. And I hear journalism is dead all the time. Have you all heard that too? It's like the big secret. Journalism's dying. I heard that journalism was dying in 1997 when I went to Bragg School. It was dying back then. So here are all the times that journalism was dying. It was dying when the telegraph was invented. It was dying with the radio. It was dying with the television, the color television, the internet, social media, and now AI. And I can't say that it's going to look just like it does today in 20 years, just like 40 years ago you couldn't have said that. But it will evolve. This is an industry that is very good at evolving, and it evolves often because young people come into it and take it in new directions. And so I would say, please don't be discouraged. There's so many people who maybe the spring in your ear, and you've seen it. So I'm hopeful we won't get there. But I think there's a lot of interesting evolution ahead of us, and you all may be part of that evolution.
I think I'm the only person up here on the panel that does not have. I've never been a reporter. I've never been an editor, and so sure it's no surprise here that I would say that that I would encourage you to be open to a path that you didn't plan for. Look at me. I majored in Spanish, and now I'm a director of operations at the New Yorker. So I think I truly believe in internships, getting your feet wet, trying things out. You might just get lucky and find a career like I did. That's not, and I'm not ragging on, reporters or editors, but I'm just saying there's so many other roles in the newsroom. And so I just encourage you to try this.
Yeah, I think my advice is in keeping with what everyone else has said, but I would say, take the first job. The experience of professional writing, working with an editor and publishing your work, even if that is the Collegian, I will say that counts. But that, I think, really getting your feet wet, even if it's at a place you've never heard of, or at a place that's maybe not as prestigious as the one you want to hold out for. I think that experience is so valuable, and it really does get you the next job and get you the next job. My first job in journalism was actually a paycheck job, a terrible paycheck, but I covered the internet domain name industry for a place called Warren Communications News, which is, I do think it still exists, but terrible outlet. It was in a basement, awful job. And but within 6 months, I did a good job. I did my beat, and Politico came and asked me to work there. So it really is just about sort of starting somewhere. All you have to do is start somewhere. So don't hold out, take the job, and just start doing it.
Thank you all so much. Can we get a big round of applause for our panelists? At this point, we are thrilled to open it up to questions from the audience. So we will have 2 Collegian staffers on either side of the room with microphones, and they are ready to hand them off to whoever has questions. And we encourage you to put your hand up, be brave, set a real link. And I see one all the way up top, so we'll start with you. So be patient, all of mine. Next flip.
I need to work as far as possible. I wanted to hear who is making good, weird art and how they're funding it. Is there anything that you're reading? Emma, you've been at the Hairpin. I really miss these communities of online support that supported their writers at an early stage, and they were able to grow, and I felt like they were speaking to an audience that was specific. The Times speaks to many different audiences. The New Yorker has a number of communities that it's speaking to. And you all worked at the Thrill. Are there smaller places that are getting the support that they need? And I'll make this easier by making it a two-pronged question. I just listened to a Science of Sleep podcast with Kate Berlant that was funded by Mattress Firm, and my husband's librarian, and both of us were like, oh, maybe that's how you make art. You like get Mattress Firm to support you in studying the science of sleep. Can you think of somebody who's writing something great right now and how they're doing it?
And try to take us. I love that question. First of all, if Mattress Firm wants to pay me, it's straight down. But honestly, a lot of the writers that I follow and read, like I read the writing of Delia Kai a lot of the time, who's on Substack, and I think there's a complex conversation to be had about. I think, look, it's good to have editors, and you need them. And I don't think dispensing editors and all becoming our own individual platform the way forward. But in terms of what I read that feels like it's being funded in a non-traditional way, that is not good if you're traditional user out. I love Delia's Substack. I am still, I don't really know how profitable they are, but I've been reading a lot of Straddle since I was like, great. So, independent newsrooms that are doing the work and continually, putting out content without the kind of funding we might go for them, the ones that still exist, I think are important to spend our time with. I'm thinking I will have a puller list, and just want to talk to me after, or really good Substacks that are really good places doing work that, is not funded by Mattress Firm, but something like that. And I'll just add, there are a lot of local news startups, and look for those and support those in Chicago. I think we are so well served by some of our startups in ways that the big dailies didn't always serve us. There's a startup, it's actually not a startup anymore, it's been around for a couple of years, called Blockflow Chicago. They do amazing work. Yeah. They do incredible work. And part of what they do that we work seeing from the big dailies, at recent days, is really covering neighborhoods. And that's what, Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. That's what we want. And there are a lot of startups like that. And I would look for those and read them and subscribe to them and, talk about that and spread the word.
Do you not need a question?
Yeah. Hi. As a psych major, I have noticed that in my research that science and facts are often kept behind a paywall. I've also noticed that you need to pay for left-leaning news organizations like the New York Times, but not right-leaning organizations like Fox. Are paywalled news sources contributing to the country's political divide, and do you think asking for money keeps the facts from those who need them?
I think, paywall news sources are obviously like a growing trend. I think there's big questions about that big rate. I guess hard though to see that I was including, but not only the Times, often their paywall during big important events. So I believe I'm having a lot has happened the last 5 years. My belief is when the Times is running this coded data collection project, so you go and see your rates of both that your community that was outside of the paywall. You all could see how it's the paywall for major weather emergencies in the community, and so I think that is really a balance, and readers are to mark to see that or it's bad.
As someone who works for a paywall publication, I really wish that the industry was in a place where the onus was on corporate media and not readers to get to pay for your ability to read the news. It makes me sad that we're not there, and I fully believe that we should be. That's not a answer, but I do. I get frustrated too when I can't read on every.
Yeah, the classic line to tell you is that journalism is really expensive to make, right? Like, we all work really hard, and even if I worked in small places, like, it's like difficult to express the amount of like staff time and energy that goes into working on this work. And also like, it's not like we're getting, like as many people have alluded to, pay is not that great. So like, it's not like those dollars are like funding lavish parties or anything like maybe advertising dollars used to pay for. But I think your question about science and facts is a really good one. I do think many places lower their paywall in big news events, as Steven said. I also think there's something to be said for trusted information. And I think there has to be sort of a way to continue trusting the information you have. And part of that is going to be paying for it in some way or another. And maybe it's asking everybody to take off their ad blockers. But I love this not. I don't have a good idea.
I already have the mic. I guess I wanted to ask. I've heard from online and other places from a number of professional journalists, especially regarding politics, especially international politics, in large publications, the force of editorial control when it comes to coverage. And I think when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking specifically about the issues of Israel-Palestine, and also in the context of purchasing of these large papers by billionaires, for example. What is your opinions on the state of that kind of editorial control, where journalists may want to cover something in a specific way or a specific topic, and that may be altered or limited by higher ups?
I'm happy to take a question. I guess what I would say is I'm not sure what you mean by editorial control, because I think when I think of editorial control, I think of editorial decision making, which is at least the way that it works at the New York Times. Our masthead of journalists makes decisions about our coverage, informed by reporters. So I'm not sure if you're alluding to something different, but I would say, generally speaking, that's sort of the way that it goes.
Maybe speak to this a little, and I would just refer back to my earlier point about unions. Like, there have been times where I have not felt like, where I work for publications where I feel like my politics and the politics of the publication don't necessarily align. And there's obviously a difference between printing my non-aligned opinion in their publication and expressing it on my personal social media. And I think having the power to express the things that I care about on my social media is important to me, and that's part of why I pay in dues. I don't know if that really answers your question, but it feels it's easier to conceive of not necessarily having a platform of my national, very large publication to say whatever I want, when I remember that I'm an individual. I have union protected rights to express myself the way I want on social media, whether I'm an also loved it.
And let me just add, I kill this for myself, that sort of work beer and I cover. I have always felt the power at times and before to do independent reporting. It is based like DBK, you stare at the tellies. Like I just say, you get out of the plane with the plane, right? That you don't go to pretty TV notions, you don't go in knowing all the stories. You go and you find it. And again, speaking all over myself, that is what I always thought, not just how to accept it to do my laws.
Can I also just horrifically add to the point about billionaire owners? Just thinking of the past question, there is one benefit of billionaire owners, which is it allows us to sometimes lower the people. So, the good side.
Thank you guys so much. We have time for one more question.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what do you perceive as your role as a journalist in just reporting straight facts versus the effect it'll have on the world? Like, do you ever think you have to like change your story or censor yourself because the effect it could have, you don't want that effect?
I mean, I think what you're about to report is something that would have significant major impact on the world. I will get our editor. I would get a bunch of really, really smart people together to discuss that. The thing, kind of think to this last question that I just wanted to mention, maybe it's a little bit about like you have recording hacks, and that's you get to it take on part here, but the history of journalism is in some ways we can look at like just to the social sciences, and the social sciences came through feminism, ecology, ethnography, to think about the researcher as a social instructivism. And journalism never really got there. So journalism is still kind of what we think that was like a positivist approach, right? Like a fact, you be a fact, you can determine the fact, you can figure out fact is through inquiry, through, testing, through research. And I think sometimes we as journalists need to think about our social worlds and who we are and how that impacts and affects what we cover. So we call this or think about it as positionality. And we do encourage our journalists, the students, to think about what their positionality is before they embark on some type of coverage, so that they can kind of understand where do they draw the line, what might be the areas that they're not looking because of how like a seated world or experience. So I just want to mention that because I think this idea of facts is something that sometimes is a little bit more opaque than the updates.
I would just say translate it is not all super clear to read to others is the amount of conversation that the institution in an insurer. And so a big publication or a big outlet, you will have two of people who do standards or as the standard practices, and their job is to come in and help with these clear conversations and give guidance based on a publicated, well-established rules and the way that they think about it. But I think we see the hard story on page. It can get to something that you don't see is the amount of conversation between reporters, reporting editors, reporter manager, how is like calling safety, giving a hair, pretty cultures. I get a hurry forward, but then like it did public for me. And then even above your editor, your boss, better. And he has so many layers of experience that I think those conversations really, really do happen. And it's good.
Yeah, I would just say that something I hear a lot of someone ever would not necessarily very into all the time of maybe weighing on somebody and they're having is just the privilege or responsibility of the platform. Like a lot of the time I want to be writing about if I make offer about for the issues that are very dear in my heart and very important to me, but I know that writing about them for an audience of everyone who might be reading Vogue is afraid they're writing about them for, say, I call it blog, or for a small network of people who like listening might have more context in what I say. So I do think about, do I want necessarily talk about something up to the world at large, just a little grandiose, but do I necessarily, is it something I want to write out of the Vogue story? It's something I want about it was saying about the reporters. It's something I want to make about my Substack. It was not a official iteration, but I think there should always be a place for you to work out this already long tell. It's just a question for where.
Also, whatever it has said, but work on a lot of coverage. It's like would surprise you how much thought goes into these decisions. But maybe not in the way that you're asking quite in Vox. I really think like he said, I work on a lot of coverage of sort of like the fringiest parts of Twitter, multiplayer apps. And we talk a lot about, people are tweeting about something really racist and really hateful, or this conspiracy theory is starting to bubble. But I think we ask, if we read about this in the New York Times, is that giving it weight and elevation and a platform, and we shouldn't be giving it? But then when Trump tweets it, maybe then it's okay, great. Then it's reached a point where it's actually part of public understanding and like public discourse in a way that we should be writing about. So I think those are the questions that we're asking ourselves, like, always. Like, it's a huge part of the job. Like, what should we cover and what should we not? But I don't know that it's coming from a place of, like, how do we inform and how do we educate, and coming from a place of, like, how do we tell truth?
Thank you all very, very much for the